diving, kimjang, make some unforgettable memories while having fun.
Last but not least, the advanced level. It's the memory of the World Register. Korea possesses an extensive documentary heritage. Korea is serious about documentation and preservation.
A tour of Korean cultural heritage will become a legacy of your own.
Why not make your own Korean cultural heritage travel itinerary?
Isn't it fascinating?
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
President Lee Jae-myung and U.S. President Donald Trump held their first summit talks in Washington on Monday local time, with much of their first talks centering around North Korea. The two leaders agreed to work together on the shipbuilding industry and had meaningful discussions on nuclear energy cooperation. Also in the U.S., President Lee laid out his vision to further tighten the ROK-U.S. alliance. Plans to do so include increasing Seoul's defense spending to beef up its security posture. And South Korea's main opposition People Power Party has chosen Jang Dong-hyeok as its new leader in Tuesday's runoff. We begin tonight with the Trump summit. The two leaders' first face-to-face largely centered around the Korean Peninsula and North Korea issues, among others. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Much of the focus at the Oval Office meeting was on resuming dialogue with North Korea, as President Lee Jae-myung met his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump, on Monday.
얼마 전에 김여정이 미국과 저를 비난하는 발언을 할 때도 대통령과 김정은 위원장의 특별한 관계에 대해서는 의심하지 않는다 이런 표현을 했습니다. 기다리고 있다는 뜻으로 보여졌습니다. 한반도의 평화의 새 길을 꼭 열어주시기 바랍니다.
I will do that, and we'll have talks. He'd like to meet with me.
Saying that he wished to see a Trump Tower being constructed in North Korea and play golf there. He asked Trump to play a peacemaker role for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And Trump expressed his hope of meeting Kim Jong-un this year. The American leader touted his personal ties with Kim, saying they get along really well. When asked whether he will be attending the APEC leaders meeting later this year in Korea, he said he expects to visit Korea soon for a trade meeting. On top of that, according to President Lee's national security advisor, the two leaders agreed to cooperate on the shipbuilding industry and had meaningful discussions on nuclear energy cooperation. When it comes to modernizing the alliance,
we're adjusting specific phrases, but there's a broad consensus.
he added that South Korea aims to strengthen joint defense security through modernizing the alliance, hinting at a hike in Korea's defense spending. With regard to Trump mentioning that he wanted to ask Seoul for U.S. ownership of the Korean land used by U.S. forces stationed in Korea, we added that he needed to find out the background behind such remarks. With the E-Trump summit concluded, eyes are now on how North Korea's Kim Jong-un will respond to their calls for dialogue, with the inter-Korean ties still looking frosty. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Washington, D.C.
The two leaders also discussed specifics of the package deal worth $350 billion proposed by the Korean government, with a big chunk of that going into shipbuilding cooperation. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Closing the tariff talks and boosting economic ties topped President Lee Jae-myung's agenda at his summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. Meeting on Monday at the White House, the two leaders zeroed in on shipbuilding and other economic cooperation, the earlier means for South Korea to negotiate a lower tariff rate.
말씀하신 조선 분야뿐만이 아니라 제조 분야에서 르네상스가 이루어지고 있고 그 과정에서 대한민국도 함께하게 되길 기대합니다.
President Trump also took the chance to tout the New Deal, emphasizing the importance of the big portion of the $350 billion investment package going into shipbuilding.
We are thinking about contracting some ships. They build them very well in South Korea. They're also thinking about coming to our country with some shipyards to start us on the process of building ships again. Do you know what world?
The summit was also followed by a business roundtable in Washington, D.C. More than 30 business heavyweights from both countries, which are already working together or seeking to do so, came together. This includes Samsung Electronics chief Lee Jae-yong and NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, among others. There, President Lee called the business leaders the, quote, backbone of the alliance.
동맹의 바탕은 신뢰이고 신뢰를 높일 가장 좋은 방법은 역시 경제적 교류입니다. 그렇기 때문에 우리 기업인 여러분들이야말로 72년 한미 동맹의 그 역사 자체입니다.
He also highlighted shipbuilding again, vowing to press ahead with the Make America Shipbuilding Great Again project announced last month. He said Korean companies can play a decisive role in reviving the U.S. shipbuilding industry. And in the meantime, he promised strong government support for businesses on both sides. Korean companies, for their part, announced a substantial additional investment pledge in addition to the trade deal.
Korean companies plan to invest $150 billion, joining forces with the U.S. in global markets to usher in a new era of manufacturing renaissance.
The U.S. Secretary of Commerce, who had been involved in negotiating with the Korean government, also touted the economic cooperation.
Today, American and Korean businesses, we aren't just trading goods. We are building a future together.
And as business leaders and government officials got together at the roundtable, 2 contracts and 9 MOUs were signed across 5 sectors: shipbuilding, nuclear power, aviation, LNG, and critical minerals. Kim Doo-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, rooted in the 2 leaders' first summit talks on Monday was a warm and a friendly atmosphere. Our Park Hyo-bin tells us more.
The first South Korea-U.S. summit since President Lee Jae-myung's inauguration opened a warm display of camaraderie between the 2 leaders. As President Lee arrived at the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump came out to greet him, and the 2 exchanged a firm handshake.
We're going to have a good meeting. We're going to have a great meeting.
When the 2 leaders entered the White House to sign the guest book, Trump personally pulled out the chair for Lee. After Lee finished signing, Trump asked for the pen, and Lee readily offered it as a gift.
Is that your pen?
네, 가지고 있는.
Very good. It's a nice pen. Do you want to take it with you? I won't use it, but I'm going to keep it because I don't want to use it. I want to have it as an honor and keep it in a very important place. Okay. And I have gifts for you. Before we leave, we have to remember.
Moving into the Oval Office for the summit, the 2 leaders exchanged kind words. President Trump once again congratulated Lee on his election victory, while Lee praised the U.S. economy.
And it's a great honor to be with you, and congratulations on your election. That was a big one.
제가 보니까 사상 최고치를 경신하고 있던데 오늘은 잠깐 조정됐지만 아주 훌륭하게 미국이 다시 위대해지고 있는 것 같습니다.
The misunderstanding over Trump's Truth Social post, which had heightened tensions before the summit, was also put to rest. Earlier, Trump had written on his Truth Social that purge or revolution seemed to be unfolding in South Korea, adding that the U.S. could not do business there, apparently referring to investigations into former President Yoon Suk-yeol and alleged raids on U.S. military bases. During the summit, the issue came up and the misunderstanding was dispelled as Lee clarified the situation.
I heard from Intel that there was a raid on churches. We're going to talk about that later. I haven't spoken about it yet, but when we meet. And, that would be too bad if that's the case. But I did hear that from Intel, that there was a raid on churches closing.
지금 대한민국은 아시는 것처럼 친위 쿠데타로 인한 혼란이 이제 극복된 지 얼마 안 된 상태고 특검에 의해서 사실 조사가 진행 중입니다. 미군을 직접 수사한 게 아니고 그 부대 안에 있는 한국군의 통제 시스템이 어떻게 작동했나를 확인한 것 같습니다.
I am sure it's a misunderstanding. I'm sure that's going to be worked out fine.
Despite the tensions stirred by Trump's remarks ahead of the talks, the 2 leaders wrapped up their first summit on a conciliatory note. After the summit, Trump called Lee a very good guy, very good representative for South Korea. Lee also said the talks went very well, adding that they had discussed far more issues than expected. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
Staying in the U.S., the South Korean leader also on Monday delivered a policy speech at one of America's leading think tanks, outlining the future of the ROK-U.S. alliance. Our Presidential Office correspondent Song Yu-jin was there.
Following his first summit with U.S. President Donald Trump, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung laid out his vision for the 2 countries' 7-decade-long alliance in a speech at the Center for Strategic and International Studies think tank.
안보, 경제, 첨단 기술의 3가지 기둥 위에 우뚝 선 미래형 포괄적 전략 동맹은 양국 국민을 위한 실용과 국익의 결정체로서 앞으로 더욱 찬란하게 빛나게 될 것입니다.
The president pledged a more leading role for his whole in security on the Korean Peninsula while maintaining a strong joint defense posture with Washington.
국방비를 증액할 것입니다. 그 늘어난 국방비는 우리 군을 21세기 미래전에서 반드시 승리하는 스마트 강군으로 육성하기 위한 첨단 과학 기술과 자산을 도입하는 데 사용될 것입니다.
This is the first time President Lee has stated that South Korea will increase its defense spending, which the Trump administration has been pressing for. With that modernized alliance, the allies will work to bring lasting peace and denuclearization to the Korean Peninsula.
한미 양국은 북한의 도발에는 강력히 대응하는 동시에 북한과의 대화를 위한 노력도 병행해 나갈 것입니다.
Turning to the economy, President Lee called last month's trade agreement a springboard for deeper cooperation in advanced technologies.
세계 1위 역량을 갖춘 대한민국의 K조선이 미국 조선업의 르네상스를 열어가며 양국이 공동 번영할 새로운 역사적 계기를 만들 것입니다.
Also mentioned was Japan, a crucial partner of the Allies, which President Lee visited just before the U.S.
저는 트럼프 대통령과 함께 굳건한 한미동맹을 바탕으로 한미일 협력을 긴밀히 다져 나갈 것입니다. 3국이 북한의 핵과 미사일 위협에 공동 대처하며 인태 지역과 글로벌 차원에서의 평화와 번영을 위해 더욱 노력해 나갈 것입니다.
The president concluded his 17-minute speech saying that the golden era of the alliance is yet to come.
함께라면 우리는 더욱 위대한 것을 이루어낼 수 있습니다. 그 영광의 순간을 위해서 같이 갑시다.
His CSIS visit was followed by dinner with American opinion leaders. So with day 2 now over, the South Korean president will travel to Philadelphia on Tuesday to tour the Hanwha Philly shipyard, recently acquired by Korea's Hanwha Group. 송유진, Arirang News, Washington, D.C.
Now, following the D.C. summit, South Korea's government and industry leaders are discussing ways to move their economic partnership going forward. Based on the leaders' push for cooperation in strategic areas, our Oh Soo-young has more.
Trust and effective policies are crucial to build a win-win partnership between Korea and the United States. Hours after the first summit between Presidents Lee Jae-myung and Donald Trump in Washington, D.C., a forum in Seoul gathered industry officials and policy experts to discuss the future of economic security cooperation.
So based on the common understanding reached at today's summit, I believe Korea and United States will work more closely in these vital areas such as shipbuilding and critical the minerals and also the energy security.
While the first E-Trump meeting set a positive tone for economic cooperation, there was no joint statement released afterwards. Thus, it seems Seoul and Washington will continue to fine-tune trade relations and details on investment. According to one former U.S. trade official, the era of tariffs and renegotiations will persist for the foreseeable future. Facing such uncertainty, he suggested Seoul commit to sectors vital to the U.S. economy in the long run, from shipbuilding and energy to strategic technologies such as advanced semiconductors.
So it's about jobs in the United States, it's about jobs in certain states in the United States, it's about expanding our industry and our supply chains and our capability. Those take time to develop, the training takes time, but the more you do that, the more you invest, the more likely it is that you'll be able to have a long-term, stable relationship with the United States.
But first, active measures are needed to build trust and cooperation, particularly in highly sensitive areas such as building naval vessels and future technologies. Key industry players such as Hana Ocean, SK Gas and POSCO Future M called for effective policy action in the US, as current legislation and a lack of incentives hinder foreign investment in America. Seoul's foreign ministry aims to foster a conducive environment for mutually beneficial partnerships, offering attractive Korean business opportunities while stably nurturing US competence and jobs in strategic sectors.
I believe Korea and United States are ideal partners for economic security. We lead in technology and manufacturing, and above all, we share a relationship built on trust. Currently, we are facing very serious and complex challenges in areas such as emerging technologies, supply chains, and also energy security.
To navigate global changes and address common challenges together, Deputy Minister Kim Hee-sang said Korea and the US are working to build a future-oriented, comprehensive strategic alliance. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Leading foreign outlets have observed that the South Korea-U.S. summit managed to steer clear of anticipated tension, unfolding in a notably smooth manner. Our Moon Ji-young tells us more.
Contrary to widespread concern, global media outlets have highlighted that the high-stake meetings proceeded without incident.
Foreign media outlets see this summit as a significant milestone that strengthens trilateral cooperation among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, centered around the ROK-U.S. alliance, and as having removed uncertainties, thereby restoring the growth potential of our companies.
The New York Times specifically pointed out that President Trump talked up the Korea-U.S. alliance, notably expressing interest in purchasing South Korean ships. The newspaper also noted Trump's repeated comments on his good relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, saying North Korea has great potential and even offering to mediate a meeting between Kim and President Lee. The BBC noted President Lee's diplomatic prowess, highlighting his ability to charm and successfully avoid public disagreements, especially on sensitive trade and defense issues. It also observed that the leaders found common ground regarding North Korea, with President Trump frequently mentioning North Korean leader Kim. The Washington Post added that despite apparent differences, Trump and Lee found common ground, with the summit serving to establish rapport between them. Both leaders survived assassination attempts last year and saw political boost despite past indictments. Politico characterized President Lee's outcome as a definitive win, observing that he emerged unscathed and even charmed President Trump through lighthearted exchanges. 문지영, Arirang News.
The Presidential Chiefs of Staff of Seoul and Washington have established a direct communication line. This is according to South Korea's Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Won-sik on Monday, who told reporters that the decision to open such a channel with his U.S. counterpart Susie Wiles reflected the need for sustained, comprehensive talks on key security, trade, and economic issues between the two nations. Kang added he met with Wiles at the White House around 2.5 hours before the E-Trump summit to discuss issues including diplomacy and security. Monday's announcement came as Kang's U.S. visit with President Lee raised questions, as the president's chief of staff normally stays in the country to oversee domestic matters during the leader's overseas trips.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you planning to make? I also want to ask this question to Mr. President.
Who are you with?
I'm Song Mi-jin. I am from South Korea's Arirang TV. Thank you so much. So, as mentioned earlier, United States is South Korea's most important and closest ally. So, in this point of view, I would like to ask you and also President Lee, what do you think are the key ways to make the South Korea-U.S. alliance greater?
Well, I think it's great now. I feel very warmly toward South Korea. I will tell you that I have a lot of people in business that I deal with that are from South Korea. They love Trump because they feel I've saved. I think you would have had a nuclear war if I weren't. I think you would have had a nuclear war, North Korea and South Korea. I think it would have been a disaster. You're only 60 miles away from Seoul. They don't even need nuclear. They have their cannons, howitzers, and they have them buried in the mountain. You know what I'm talking about. And I think you would have had, if I didn't win that election, if Hillary Clinton, crooked Hillary, won that election, I think you would have had a nuclear war. It would have taken place, and it would have been horrendous for everybody, including them. It would have been very bad for them because we would have had to enter the picture, and we are the most powerful nuclear country in the world by far. Russia's second, China's third. China's going to catch eventually, 5 or 6 years. They're working to catch. One of the things we're trying to do with Russia and with China is denuclearization. And it's very important. One of the things I discussed with President Putin the other day, it wasn't just that, it was also other things. And I think the denuclearization is it's a big aim, but Russia's willing to do it, and I think China's going to be willing to do it too. We can't let nuclear weapons proliferate. We have to stop nuclear weapons. The power is too great. Okay? Thank you.
Now on the local front, in a leadership race that went down to the wire, the People Power Party has elected Jang Dong-hyeok as its new leader. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details on what his victory means for the political landscape ahead.
The main opposition People Power Party has chosen Jang Dong-hyeok as its new leader. Tang edged out rival Kim Mun-soo in the runoff on Tuesday, securing 50.27% of the votes, a lead of just over 2,300 ballots. The leadership race went to a runoff after no candidate secured a majority in the first ballot. Kim, the party's former presidential candidate, had initially polled strongly. But Tang, a younger lawmaker seen as representing generational change whilst aligning closely with the hardline conservative base, consolidated support among in-party voters and emerged victorious. In his acceptance speech, Tang framed his election as a turning point.
Choosing me as party leader marks the beginning of reform. I will renew the People Power Party and lead it into the future, carrying the wishes of our members.
Political analysts say Chang's win represents a rejection of more conciliatory voices in the party and instead signals closer alignment with the hardline anti-impeachment conservative base. This raises the prospect of even sharper clashes with the Democratic Party, which has used its parliamentary majority to push through a series of contentious reform bills in recent weeks. The PPP has countered by staging marathon filibusters to delay legislation, heightening political gridlock and fueling partisan tensions at the National Assembly. The DP's leader, Chung Chung-le, branded the PPP a party of insurrection shortly following the announcement of its new leadership, and expectations are mounting that parliamentary gridlock will only deepen. Tang also faces significant challenges within his own camp, as he now inherits not only the reins of the party, but also the challenge of restoring its political momentum. He faces the immediate task of strengthening internal cohesion while preparing for next June's local elections, where the PPP hopes to secure more regional leadership posts and regain influence on the ground. Moon Hae-ryung, Arirang News.
And now on Tuesday, the government and ruling party met to discuss next year's budget plan, agreeing that the administration should play an active fiscal role in tough economic times. They also decided to make the R&D budget the largest ever. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
The government's 2026 budget plan will emphasize expansionary fiscal policies, marking a shift from the previous administration's focus on fiscal soundness. The direction was hinted at during a budget meeting between the government and the ruling Democratic Party on Tuesday. The DP said the economy is struggling and people's livelihoods are under even greater strain, stressing that national finance must play an active role for the people.
The government and the DP decided to learn from the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's fiscal mistakes and make next year's budget support people's livelihoods and respond to global uncertainties. As the first budget of the government of people's sovereignty, we will ensure taxpayers' money is used fully for the people.
At the meeting, the government and the DP called the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's R&D cuts a mistake and agreed to set next year's R&D budget at a record high. They plan to expand spending on research into semiconductors such as GPUs to make South Korea a top 3 AI power and build an AI-driven society. The plan also includes raising the age limit for childcare subsidies beyond the current cap of below 8. Deputy Prime Minister for Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul said the Lee Jae-myung administration's first budget will be performance-oriented, cutting what's unnecessary and investing boldly in areas that drive recovery and growth. The budget plan is expected to be approved at a cabinet meeting this Friday. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The rain gradually stopped this afternoon in most parts of the country, but some eastern areas will continue to have rain until tonight. The expected amount of rain is up to 80 millimeters in the Jeollado provinces, 10 to 50 millimeters in western parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-namdo provinces. With rain falling, the daytime temperature was 1 to 2 degrees lower than yesterday, but the heat felt worse than the actual readings as the air continues to be humid. Seoul will rise to 32 degrees Celsius tomorrow, and there will be many places above 30 degrees, mainly in Jeollabuk-do province, the Gyeongsang-do provinces, and Jeju Island, where a heatwave warning is in place. Tomorrow morning, Seoul, Gwangju, and Daegu will start off at 24 degrees, Busan at 25 degrees. Highs will move up to around 31 to 32 degrees in most parts of the country. The heatwave warnings are expected to be expanded again tomorrow around the western regions. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
플라스틱 사실 편리하잖아요. 저조차도 활동을 하고 있지만 플라스틱을 사용할 정도로 생활에 많이 있다고 생각을 하는데요. 플라스틱을 대체할 수 있는 걸 계속해서 찾고 플라스틱이 아닌 다른 것을 사용하는 게 일상의 습관이 될 수 있도록 하는 것이 조금 중요하다고 생각을 해서 삼색클럽 캠페인을 중점으로 활동하고 있습니다. 저희는 HDP랑 PP라는 두 가지 재질의 플라스틱을 모으고 있습니다. 보통 음식류에 사용되기 때문에 배달용기나 이런 곳에서 많이 볼 수 있고, 그리고 두 번째로는 저희가 업사이클 가공을 할 때 가장 유독물질이 덜 나오는 물질이기 때문입니다. 플라스틱을 많이 모으고 많이 제작하는 것이 목적이 아니다 보니까 저희는 시민분들한테 플라스틱 기부받고 리워드를 드리는 게 아니라 모아주신 플라스틱이 이렇게 재활용됐다는 걸 알리기 위해서 하는 프로젝트여가지고 이걸 약간 기부가 아닌 돌려드리는 개념으로 지금 하는 규칙을 사용하고 있는 것 같습니다. 불편한 거예요. 사실 이 플라스틱을 실제로 사용하는 걸 모으고 이걸 세척해서 가져오시고 하는 과정이 이 불편함을 사실 해주고 계신 것만으로도 저희는 되게 감사하죠. 나아가서 플라스틱을 사용하지 않을 수 있는 방법을 내는 것이 저희의 숙제이고요. 그리고 가장 중요한 건 이런 자원순환 활동에 있어서 시민 참여가 어떻게 얼마나 중요한 키워드로 적용이 되는지를 계속 말씀을 드리고 싶어요. 그래서 시민 참여 가이드를 조금 내는 게 저희의 목표이자 바람이라고 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 나는 플라스틱을 순환시키는 그리너다.
To be only being animal, let it flow. I don't need a reason, 눈치 없지. 너에게로 빠져. Bring me, leave me, come sunshine face, but I'm still here. September. Ferrari, money.
도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로.
나에게 에이펙은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성, 포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 에이펙 2025로 이어집니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. The very first summit between President Lee Jae-myung and U.S. President Donald Trump ran well past schedule, a sign of just how much was at stake. For over 2 hours, the two leaders placed peace on the Korean Peninsula, the strength of the alliance, and future cooperation at the heart of their talks. It was a meeting that mixed powerful symbolism with hard questions, from North Korea and economic cooperation to defense costs, leaving the world to ask, was this just another summit or the beginning of a new chapter in these Seoul-Washington relations? So to help us break all these down, we're joined by Evans Revere, former Acting Assistant Secretary of State and non-resident senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings. A big welcome.
Great to be with you.
And also joining us is Hanna Kim, Associate Professor at the Seogang University's GSIS. Good to see you, Professor.
Thanks for having me again.
So let's begin our discussion with Mr. Revere. So President Lee's first summit with President Trump, it lasted 140 minutes, about 20 minutes longer than what was expected. What does this extended length and overall tone tell us about the current state of the alliance?
Well, I wouldn't draw any conclusions about the summit based solely on the length of time of the meeting, quite frankly. As you pointed out a moment ago, the two leaders had a very long and complicated agenda to discuss. And so it's no surprise that the meeting ran over the scheduled time. This happens very often at summits, as I can attest from personal experience over the years. I think a much more important indicator of the outcome of the summit was the Oval Office meeting, where the media was present. By any reasonable measure, that meeting went extremely well, and it also, quite frankly, defied the expectations of many, including me. But you pointed out the tone of the overall summit, and I think that's an important thing to focus on. As you may know, my academic expertise is in the history of China-Korea relations. And in that context, as I watched that Oval Office meeting and watched how President Lee handled it, I found the summit a remarkable reminder of the skill that Koreans have developed over many centuries in managing relations with a powerful state, dealing with delicate policy and economic differences, understanding the importance of things like ritual and protocol and flattery, in dealing with a powerful and eccentric leader, and understanding that there is a big difference between political performance and diplomatic progress. President Lee gave us a master class in all of those things in that Oval Office meeting with President Trump. President Lee understood Trump's psychology, and it showed in the way the meeting in the Oval Office unfolded. President Lee ensured that the discussion focused largely on the one topic on which he and President Trump mostly agree, North Korea. Other more contentious topics, difficult topics, were left to the closed-door session. And I think President Lee understood also that these Oval Office sessions are designed to be performative, and he played his role very, very skillfully, helping set, I think, that positive tone that I mentioned.
Right, so it really seemed like a huge diplomatic development strategy in terms of diplomacy, of course. We also want to hear Professor Kim's opinion. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Revere. You know, this extended duration really did indicate that there were a lot of broad issues that needed to be covered. You know, because of the political vacuum that South Korea was in, it really prevented and delayed a much needed summit. And as you mentioned, because the meeting had originally been scheduled for 120 minutes, but it lasted 20 minutes more, it was a total of 140 minutes. So in diplomatic practice, this type of extension can suggest two things. One, either that there were some significant disagreements that required additional time to reconcile, or two, more positively, that the leaders had a wide range of substantive issues to discuss beyond the pre-agreed agenda. And considering that President Lee and President Trump emerged from the talks in visibly good spirits, in this context, it's very likely that the latter explanation seems more likely. So in many ways, in addition to reaffirming the strength of the U.S.-ROK alliance and exploring avenues such as deeper cooperation in shipbuilding, the two leaders also engaged in meaningful discussions on a number of additional fronts. So we can see that with the extended time.
Right, so it was very clear that the duration itself tells us something about how much was on the table and the amicable atmosphere over there. Now, one of the most sticking points of the summit, many say, was President Lee's praising of President Trump as a, quote, peacemaker, and he even joked that he would serve also as a pacemaker. Mr. Revere, I wonder, how did you see this? As a former U.S. diplomat who has experience in negotiating with North Korea as well, how do you assess the diplomatic significance of this framing?
Well, I'm not at all surprised to discover that President Lee hopes to play an intermediary role in the possible resuscitation of U.S.-North Korea dialogue. I think that explains his use of the word pacemaker, being in the background and sometimes in the foreground, nudging things along in a direction in which he'd like to see things go. I certainly understand his motivation, but things have changed dramatically since the earlier Trump-Kim summits. North-South Korea relations have become more hostile. Seoul-Pyongyang channels have basically dried up, and North Korea has made it bluntly clear that it does not regard South Korea as a legitimate diplomatic partner going forward. This, in fact, tells me that the North Koreans are likely to reject any overtures from the ROK, as it already has in recent days. We've seen this occur over the last several days. I think from Kim Jong-un's perspective, if there is any U.S. DPRK dialogue to be had, it's going to be one that's arranged directly without any intervention by Seoul. I'm fairly sure that will be North Korea's position. I should also add, I think it's important to remember that Kim Yo-jong recently reminded us that the price of admission for such a future dialogue between the United States and North Korea would be de facto U.S. acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear power and the end of any talk about denuclearization. And that's something that Seoul is going to have, or would have, a major problem with. So this is a very complicated matter, trying to develop this sort of triangular relationship. But it's a relationship that I think Pyongyang is no longer interested in, quite frankly. And they're making that clear. And I don't know that they will change that position, but we'll see.
So having heard Pyongyang's such stance on that. It seemed it was a deliberate diplomatic signal from President Lee's part to avoid being sidelined. We'll have to keep close tabs on that. Now, staying with this theme, the summit also included appeals for President Trump to re-engage with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Professor Kim, how do you interpret this message to Pyongyang in the broader context of inter-Korean relations?
So I think some of these, this was already mentioned, but President Lee has made it clear that he cannot resolve this North Korea issue on his own, and that only President Trump has the leverage to do so. And this was in part a deliberate effort to flatter Trump, something that President Lee employed more than once during the summit. And his remark about the ornate decoration of the Oval Office, symbolizing America's bright future, is a telling example of what we would describe as praise diplomacy. And yet his statement also carries a degree of truth. So since taking office, the Lee administration has pursued more conciliatory gestures towards Pyongyang, such as dismantling South Korea's loudspeaker system along the border. But, as has been mentioned already, North Korea has not sufficiently reciprocated, and it continues to instead uphold the doctrine of the South and the North as two hostile states. And so at present, Pyongyang shows very little inclination to engage directly with Seoul. And by contrast, although its relationship with Washington remains relatively adversarial, North Korea has not entirely foreclosed the possibility of dialogue with the United States. So against this backdrop, the resolution of the nuclear issue and the creation of a more peaceful climate on the Korean Peninsula, it really hinges on U.S. involvement. And President's appeal really reflects both a strategic reading of the regional dynamics, as well as a recognition that meaningful progress with Pyongyang is more likely to be achieved through Washington than through Seoul alone.
Right. So despite North Korea's speaking of their, preconditions for resumption of dialogue between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, we just want to ask if this meeting actually would realize, Mr. Revere, when could it actually realistically take place? And do you think the upcoming APEC summit in Korea could provide that opportunity?
Well, if there were actual U.S. DPRK agreement on renewed dialogue, I suspect the schedule and the venue issues would be fairly minor. And they would be the meeting would be organized rather quickly, especially since Donald Trump, by his own admission, is eager to have such a meeting. Meeting on the margins of the APEC summit would be an interesting option. And it's one that actually might really appeal to President Trump. But in light of the current state of North-South relations, for me at least, it's difficult to see how North Korea would be able to accept a meeting on South Korean soil at this moment. They would really have to have a major shift in their policy and their overall approach towards the South. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of enthusiasm for the North Koreans. By the North Koreans for the idea of a summit on the margins of APEC, but one never knows.
Right. We'll have to see how it goes. Now, let's also touch upon the economy side. Multi-billion-dollar cooperation was announced in shipbuilding, energy, and aviation as well. Professor Kim, beyond commerce, how do these outcomes strengthen the political alliance between the two countries?
Yeah, so, in the summit, President Trump really placed a lot of emphasis on cooperation in shipbuilding. He lamented that the United States once had the capacity to launch a vessel a day, but no longer possesses such capabilities. And he openly appealed for South Korea to invest in U.S. shipyards and employ American workers. So for Washington, the revival of its shipbuilding industry is not merely a matter of reshoring manufacturing jobs. It's also carries strategic weight in countering China. Now, at present, the United States lacks the domestic conditions to rebuild the sector independently and completely. So given that the global shipbuilding market is dominated by two major players, China and South Korea, the collaboration with South Korea really emerges as Washington's main viable option. And even beyond shipbuilding, the two leaders also pledged cooperation in energy and aviation. So in highlighting these ties, I think President Trump is pointedly referring to advanced American military platforms such as the B-2 bomber. These kinds of linkages are essentially underscoring that for the United States, these agreements are not just commercial in nature, right? They have to serve to reinforce the security dimension of the alliance. So South Korea's acquisition of American weapon systems provides Washington with economic benefits while simultaneously enhancing South Korea's role in regional stability. So in this way, the economic outcomes of the summit really extend beyond commerce and embed the alliance more deeply in both strategic and industrial terms.
Right. So it really does seem economic dimension is woven tightly into political alliance as well. Now, let's talk about security now. President Trump has continued to press Korea on defense cost sharing. And with this pressure resurfacing, how do you think Seoul should respond without weakening the alliance, Mr. Revere?
Well, I understand that the ROK's National Security Advisor, Ambassador Lee Sun-lak, remarked after the summit that there had been no discussion of increasing ROK burden sharing costs during the summit. I found that curious and somewhat surprising, since this has obviously been talked about quite a bit by Washington policymakers, and it's been obviously a U.S. priority. It's possible that the two sides agreed to defer concrete discussion of this difficult topic and relegate it to ongoing bilateral exchanges. And so we'll have to see in the coming days and weeks if this topic is put on the table again for discussion. This is one of several very thorny issues that do not appear to have been resolved at the summit. So for all of my positive talk about the tone of the summit, in terms of substance, other than the economic and trade issues, and in terms of the overall tone, the positiveness of the summit, we didn't see a lot of specific progress on the very many thorny issues that exist between the two sides. For example, strategic flexibility, the level and deployment status of U.S. forces in Korea, and of course, ROK interest in revising the U.S. ROK nuclear cooperation agreement. So these are all sensitive topics, difficult topics that we know for a fact there are differing views between Seoul and Washington. And so we'll just have to see how they are dealt with in the coming weeks. And I think South Korea has already developed its strategy on how to deal with this. And we'll see how that plays out as the coming weeks unfold.
Mm-hmm. But even though, there was no direct mention of defense costs during the summit itself, President Trump actually touched upon raising the issue of U.S. ownership of American baseland in South Korea. Professor Kim, do you see this as some kind of a bargaining rhetoric or as a signal of a deeper shift in America's policy?
Actually, in my view, this was one of the most striking moments of the summit. During the talks, President Trump claimed that 40,000 U.S. troops were stationed in South Korea and that their bases were leased from Seoul. He went so far as to suggest that the United States should hold outright ownership of these facilities. So on several counts, this assertion was factually inaccurate. The actual number of U.S. forces in Korea is around 28,000, and American bases are not leased but granted under the terms of the ROK-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, Article 4, and the Status of Forces Agreement in Article 2. But President Lee actually chose not to correct these errors at the moment, and I think in many ways that may have been a wise decision given the overall atmosphere of the meeting because it was relatively positive. But setting aside these factual issues, Trump's suggestion of U.S. ownership touches directly on questions of South Korea's territorial sovereignty. It's something that no South Korean government could possibly accept. But were a Korean president even, were able to entertain such an idea, the domestic backlash would be immense. So Trump himself surely understands this, and I think he still raised the matter as a rhetorical posturing rather than substantive policy shift. he has made these kinds of comments before about the Gaza Strip and Greenland, and none of it really translated into concrete moves to alter sovereignty. So in this light, I think his remarks appear to be more about theatrics, political theatrics, and bargaining leverage rather than about signaling and a genuine reorientation of U.S. policy.
Right, so this ownership issue clearly takes the debate into new and more delicate territory. But I want to ask Mr. Revere how you found Trump's latest remarks. It was the first time to do so, right?
On this specific issue, yeah, I hadn't heard that before. I have to tell you, when I was watching the remarks on television, my first thought was that this was not some sort of conspiratorial thing that Donald Trump had cooked up to put President Lee on the spot, although I can't completely dismiss that. My first thought was that Donald Trump was just misinformed about the reality. I can see in a briefing that he might have asked a question of his briefers about the bases, and somebody may have used the word, well, these facilities and areas are given to us, they're leased to us on an open-ended basis, and when we're done using them, we return them to the Republic of Korea. And he may have fixated, as a real estate person, on this word lease. So for a change, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and chalk it up to a mistake rather than some conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. Right. So before we let you go, then could you point for us what kind of a specific opportunity from this latest summit do you think could help transform Seoul-Washington alliance into a truly future-oriented partnership?
Well, I was thinking about that as President Lee gave his remarks at CSIS. And in those remarks, he stated his government's intention to boost military spending. He did it in very forceful terms, and he talked about a future ROK military capability and budgetary capability that would help expand the ROK's military role in the alliance. And I interpreted that latter comment, the role of in the alliance, as a reference to transfer of OPCOM, operational control transfer, a very long-standing and contentious issue. These topics were presumably discussed behind closed doors at the summit, and I expect that the U.S. and the ROK are going to continue to discuss these matters via ongoing consultations after the summit. And progress on those two issues and other things, I think, would be a major development in the alliance, and I think would go a long way towards achieving the future-oriented strategic partnership that both countries seek. So I think that things are moving in a positive direction. We didn't see many issues in this area resolved during this conversation between the two leaders. But once again, as you pointed out at the outset, tone is everything here, and the tone here was positive and constructive. And so let's hope things can continue to move in this very appealing direction.
Right. So we'll hope to see some progress on some sensitive issues that haven't been discussed yet at the summit, after the summit. We'll have to conclude our discussion here at this point, but thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Mr. Revere.
You're welcome.
And Professor Kim, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.